Well, thank you, Ben. Today we have an interesting panel. We are joined today by Jignesh Patel, Director of Cloud Automation and Tools Engineering with United Airlines, as well as BJ Walraven from Consumers Energy, Cloud Transformation Lead and Enterprise Architecture. Hello, Jignesh and BJ.
Hey, David, and thank you for
Hi,
having
David.
us.
BJ, we'll actually start with you. Why don't you tell us a little bit about you and Consumers Energy?
Well, I'll try and give you a brief synopsis, but there's a bit of a story here. I've been with Consumers since 2016, and actually back in 2014 we started our cloud journey. We worked with a head to create a private cloud roadmap, and that's where we started, was within private cloud. And in 2015 we actually formed a team to help develop and create that private cloud. And in 2016 we actually made it to production, and then just shortly after that I joined. And our private cloud we affectionately call Nimbus. It's transforming into a hybrid cloud over time, but at that point I joined as the cloud engineering team lead, and we had made a lot of culture change in doing automation. That continues, but there were some interesting things to know. We had people who were afraid that they might lose their job due to automation. That's never happened, by the way. We had Scrum being introduced with a large agile transformation happening in the company. And that gave us some ability to actually work together and build our team through an agile coach. And when I joined, I asked the project manager, what's the best thing I can do to help? And he said, well, fix operations. I had no idea exactly what that meant, but that plays a lot into, I think, what we're talking about here today. We had a separate engineering team from our operations team. It was handled by an MSP that was focused really on our contract and what the SLAs and KPIs were, which were defined really before we understood really how to operate cloud fairly well. So we had some issues there. There was quite a bit of work to do to get operations, I guess I would say, operational, and focused on what our customers actually wanted. So as we started to make those changes and get operations up to snuff, we did that by not going for our SLAs first because they had financial impact, but instead kind of building a partnership with our MSP and getting our KPIs squared away. As we continued our expansion in private cloud with new blueprints and catalog items in 2017 and the creation of a public cloud landing zone, I had an opportunity to go to Looking Ahead, which is I think a predecessor to this event in 2017. And I got to see Adam Jacobs, who was a CTO from Chef, do a very brief 15-minute presentation about how to build a DevOps culture. And that was kind of a game changer for me. The idea of Dev and Ops together, why did we have them separate? What are we doing here? So that actually made a big shift for us in our operations journey. And we started to focus on things like, the specific issues that were keeping our teams apart. The fact that our MSP team was largely offshore and the teams didn't know each other well. We had a CE member that was in the mix who was very competent in the operations side, but because there wasn't a great connection between them, it made it actually a little bit even more difficult to get operations to go smoother. So we actually switched over and gave some operations ownership, which we should have probably done in the first place, to getting things into production. And that made a significant difference in getting things up to snuff and not having so many issues and outages. We actually brought in, as we were getting in that public cloud landing zone, we brought in our network and security teams, which we hadn't worked with very tightly before when we started this automation journey. And that those collaboration moments really just made a huge difference in what we were doing. So in 2018, as we started to build our public cloud landing zones out, we started taking that DevOps journey, I would say. And I officially had some accountability for the ops team, which made it a little bit easier to kind of get our teams working together. And I tried to act as a bridge between the teams for a while. That was not necessarily the best way to approach it. But we did work together with the MSP fairly tightly and agreed that we needed to make a significant change. So we took two major steps. One I had already mentioned here about ops owning all promotions to prod. That was a risky move for us because our ops team was really not very tied into what we had in the product and didn't have an ownership level there. So we knew we were taking a risk that paid off greatly. And the second one being bringing our ops team into our development group. So we actually, as we were doing Scrum, we actually grabbed a couple of folks in the ops team and said, hey, why don't you come and help us develop some of this automation? And as you're doing that development, that will make our transition to operations easier. And we just saw some great success. Our walls started to come down and our skill levels started to come up. Our communication got a lot better. It took quite a bit of time, but we feel that was one big success for us. One key thing for us is we didn't modify our contract during the experimentation phase. We actually went and figured out what worked and then kind of reformed the contract around it. So it was a good lesson learned for us. In 2019, we completed our public cloud landing zones and we built some automated VM migration into our system so we could migrate from on-prem to cloud for VMs. And that actually was an opportunity. At that time, I got the opportunity to introduce a cloud architecture position into the company. We had a relatively unexpected reorganization happen at that time, and we didn't have a centralized architecture group. So that was an opportunity for me to move out of the lead role and over into the architecture team to lead more of the transformation and less of the team lead role. So first piece we did there was publish a cloud strategy, and the big focus there was getting alignment between our IT leadership and our security leadership all the way through our delivery teams. We continue to do that, and in 2021 we're going to publish an updated version. That's been a big help for us. And then in 2020 we spent a little time expanding our public cloud workloads into the PaaS world where we hadn't really spent a lot of time before, and got our first production workloads in public cloud this year. So we formalized a cloud community, which I know we're going to talk about a little bit here in April of 2020. And our goal there is just to spread the knowledge and get people learning as much as possible. So one big challenge we've seen is that public cloud services bring just a huge wealth of opportunity, which also means a huge wealth of work. So spreading that knowledge and effort as much as possible is key for us. We published some initial standards also this year, and those standards were really helpful. Just the publishing them was really helpful to help identify gaps. And we've had a lot of projects come through and fill those gaps during the year. And that's been a great crowdsource ability for us to kind of build some standards and governance. That's been really fantastic. We're going to focus in 2021, I think, on expanding our automation abilities to different audiences. So outside of just the cloud automation and operations team, to other folks. We're going to focus on having some more workloads in the public cloud and making some further architecture choices. So that's kind of our snapshot of a journey from concept of cloud through where we are in public cloud in a hurry.
That's great, BJ. Thank you for sharing all of that. And Jignesh,
Hey, thank
United
you.
Airlines. I'm sure you guys had one heck of a story. Why don't you share a little bit of that with us?
Absolutely, and I'm going to have to steal some of David's ideas, BJ's ideas too, around the DevOps maturity on how you guys got there. It's fantastic to hear. Because some of the stuff that we're doing now, you guys did before us. So it's neat to see different industries doing things a little bit differently. So, yeah, so let's just hop right into it, right? There we go. So, yeah, back at United, this was before 2018. So a little bit background. I got at United at 2019 when they were already on their cloud journey. But this goes all the way back to 2018 and how United Airlines kind of took a stab at public cloud and transitioning in the cloud, and not necessarily transitioning, but leveraging the cloud, right? So at United, there was not a really edict to say, hey, we're going to go vacate some data centers and go directly into cloud. or we're just going to go do a massive lift and shift and migration into cloud, right? So one of the things that we've been calling cloud is we want to do cloud smart, meaning let's not just go take everything and make it work in the cloud. Instead, let's take the opportunity and do things the right way, meaning, the 5 R's. Let's think about from an application by application designation on, are we going to rehost? Are we going to re-platform? Are we going to re-architect? What is that going to look like, right? We're not just going to do a plain and simple lift and shift to the cloud, right? And so when cloud came to United, it was just another technology that we wanted to make sure that we put the right governance, operations, development around it, so it best fits into the United environment, right? So you'll see some of the older technologies, and cloud was really just a paradigm shift from that, right? So we had in the beginning a lot of the mainframe computers, which United obviously still has. We got the personal computers, the internet, the mobile devices really brought on a different way of how do we interact, not only with within United, but our external customers, right? And now we have cloud computing. And so there's a little shift in direction on who's developing, who's operating cloud, and how are we going to adopt it so it still fits within our operational model, et cetera, right? So moving right along, right? So the evolution of United's cloud, right? So this is not a one-for-one, and I didn't put years on it on purpose, right? Because this was, in some cases, the cloud foundation took a couple years, where the cloud industrialization took 6 months, not that it did. And the cloud maturity, we don't know how long it's going to take, right? So that's why I would put specific timeframes around it, but more of the general idea of, hey, how do we really get started? So first we wanted to build the cloud foundation, right? We knew we wanted to go to the cloud and we wanted to be cloud smart. But where do you start, right? It's so massive. So what we did is we picked a couple pilot applications and started to think about how we're going to deploy those pilot applications. And in that foundation, we also started like a cloud center of excellence and architectural councils to come up with standard patterns, architectures to move to the cloud, as well as engage security, right? First and foremost. And then moving a little bit more into the cloud industrialization, this started really picking up around 2019, right when I got there. And one of the big things was, hey, let's learn from phase one. So one of the things that we had to do is we found out in phase one, our landing zones were too small. So we built brand new landing zones. And that's around the same time as where the cloud technologies were also getting mature. So cloud networking was getting mature, right? So we built new landing zones. We ensured that we could dissect landing zones into app, data, PCI, SOCs, et cetera, et cetera. Along with the same time, we started going more after, hey, the applications are really going to want to come now that we have a good framework built around it. So it's time that we start thinking about some governance on what will United's cloud do and what it won't do. Like, how do we want to enable cloud at United so we're cloud smart, right, again? And so that's when we started getting the CCOE and the CBO conversation started. The CCOE is really the Cloud Center of Excellence, which is a table of stakeholders that come together on a weekly or biweekly basis to talk about not necessarily governance, because that's kind of a bad word sometimes, but talk about the maturity and are we holding ourselves accountable to the best practices that we all agreed upon, right? So that's kind of where we were, and we were really starting to get the automation and the maturity around automation and our DevOps, right? And that's kind of what BJ alluded to earlier, which was kind of interesting to hear, because now we're getting there, right? So now we're getting to a DevOps maturity on, hey, let's build that framework around what DevOps in the cloud looks like and see if we can farm it out. So one of the things at United is we have massive application teams and developers. For a organization that large to support a consumer base that big, we've had to have a lot of internal resources, right? So we want to make sure everyone is following these same standards or frameworks to go deploy in the cloud, right? So what we're working on today is our DevOps maturity. How do we mature our DevOps practices? So in the same fashion, crawl, walk, run, right? So where are we? Let's take a look in the mirror and say, hey, from a code deployment perspective, we're at a walk or a run. from a security perspective, we're at a walk, right? So how do we continue to mature those so we're all aligned to what a good DevOps maturity in a run state looks like, with the notion in mind, of course, that not everything's going to be a fully run day one, right? So it's going to have to get there. And rather than everyone work trying to figure this out themselves, let's build a quorum of DevOps folks and define that DevOps maturity rather than the CCOE or a CBOE or architecture defining it, right? So we brought the app teams to the table and said, hey, help us define what a good DevOps maturity looks like and who's involved, right? Because the last thing we want to do is have a critical outage in the cloud, right? Moving right along. So one of the things I talked about earlier was our CCOE and how it really helped us define the roles and responsibilities a little better, along with bringing the right folks to the table on what United's cloud should look like. And so here's just some quick kind of principles that we come up with as a group of stakeholders on, hey, we're going to be cloud smart with our workload placement. So we're going to do an exercise when any application wants to go to the cloud, or there's a new application that wants to go to the cloud. Is it cloud fit? Is it cloud smart? Because remember, we still have a lot of legacy infrastructure in our data center that a lot of these applications still need to go talk back to. So does it make sense for it to go to the cloud? Or are you going to build it in a fashion that latency is not an issue, right? We want to be able to promote stable and secure environments, right? So security is first and foremost at top of mind whenever we want to do anything. And we want to ensure that it's part of the pipeline. It's not a one-time process, right? And I'm not going to read through all of these, but one of the bigger things is that, once we had the original cloud applications that were the first to go, we kind of developed a cloud PMLC or adoption playbook, if you will, for other applications to use. So it's not a new process that everyone has to go develop on their own. It's kind of a rinse and repeat. So, and then we got SMEs across different areas to help with that rinse and repeat process. So diving a little bit more into our CCOE principles, our charter principles around what is it that we're trying to accomplish, right? So I talked about providing a secure and mature framework, and I've highlighted some of that around here is, hey, we really want to steward a cloud's best practices around what is it that we're going to use and how are we going to use it. So we made a pretty big statement that said, hey, we're not going to go lift and shift. We're actually going to go re-architect and re-platform some of these things. And while we're doing that, we're not going to go purchase software that's off the shelf and apply it to a virtual machine. No, we're going to try to leverage cloud native as much as possible. And that's actually worked out pretty well for us. And I mean, we found out that we had to use, there's always exceptions, right? So we found out when certain infrastructure things or platform level things, we've had to use off the shelf software to support platform level middleware or firewalls or things like that, right? Because we were just not there with everything that the cloud had to offer. So yeah, of course, we had to put our own firewalls in, proxies in, et cetera, et cetera. But then the biggest thing is, as we continue to mature in our cloud adoption, we want to be able to give a lot of these transparencies to stakeholders and reiterate on that process. And how do we do that, right? So we spun up the kind of like the CBO, which kind of gives us feedback loop mechanism into the cloud process, the cloud financials, the health of our cloud, along with some KPIs and dashboards that we consistently present at our CCOE meetings and our SteerCo meetings. So everyone's kind of aligned to, hey, where are we going with the cloud? What applications are going to the cloud, and what does the health of our cloud look like, right? So that was a huge win. Along with the last bullet point I have on the bottom right there is empower, educate, the DT organization. The more education you get, the more education and skill level you put into the cloud, the better your rewards are going to be, right? So we actually set up a lot of trainings and immersion days with our vendors, our partners, along with, we went out and got specialized training to offer to the whole organization. So we wanted to ensure that we have some sort of base knowledge that is spread across the organization on what the cloud is, how the cloud is going to be used, and how do I even get into the cloud, right? So that was a key to one of our successes in the beginning. And lastly, let's speak a little bit more about the importance that the CCOE has played. And to me, this is pretty personal, because one of the things that I got into United, I noticed that the CCOE was used more as an informational body rather than a governing or a stakeholder body. And one of my personal goals has always been, if you have a good CCOE or a good team to bring up issues to bring up governance ideas or changes in governance ideas, they're going to help you go out and implement some of these things that you're looking to do, right? So bring all your stakeholders to the table, not just engineering. Bring your application teams, security teams, operation teams to the table, because they have ideas and they have lessons that they've learned in their past, and they're going to become champions for you. So I'm not going to go down here quickly, but this is kind of the guiding principles of our CCOE, and what we're looking to ensure that we get consistent delivery, along with we're ensuring that best practices are followed, and we're not doing things that we originally said as a charter principle that we're not going to do, right? So we're not going to go get redundant software or services. We're not going to go use non-approved services. We're not going to go duplicate data to the cloud, et cetera, et cetera. So that's what I have, PJ and David. So David, back to you.
Thank you, Jignesh. And I really like the stories and the commonalities between BJ, what you shared with us for consumers, as well as Jignesh, what you shared with United. And we are coming back to the CCOE topic. So Jignesh, I appreciate the prep for that. I thought it would be a good time to just jump into some questions and answers here. We're going to have a little fun with this. So we've broken it down into different sections. This first section, I like to call "Not All Roads Lead to Nirvana." I'm going to direct the questions to you, BJ, sometimes, and Jignesh. But if the other has any answers that they'd like to add as well, please feel free to do so. BJ, we'll start with you. I'm looking back at your cloud adoption and migration, the movements that consumers has gone through. How did you address choosing the process that would guide your cloud journey compared to the technologies that were selected for deployment? In other words, how did you separate the process from the tech?
It's a good question. Certainly the tech has been easier to choose. I'll say that. We did a lot of learning from other folks. It's actually interesting to hear how similar Jignesh's journey and our journey has been in certain areas. But we leverage a consortium called Unite, where utility industry companies share IT practices. And we talk to companies who are a little bit ahead of us in the journey to try and avoid the pitfalls in the process. But I will say that one of the things that's kind of important in that journey, and I think it shows really well in the differences between our narrations of our journeys, is that we needed to pick something that was appropriate for consumers. So in our case, starting with the private cloud was a more appropriate place for us to begin. It's led to a lot of similar processes and behavior, I think, between what Jignesh had mentioned and what we're doing. But there's a little bit of technology in it, but there was also a little bit of process. We needed to bring, our existing teams into kind of the automation future. We needed to kind of transform a bit of how we were behaving and how security was integrated into the process and how networking was integrated into the process. So that was really our focus, in our process to guide our journey. It was less about what technology are we enabling and more about how are we changing our behaviors.
Yeah, behaviors is a big key thing. I appreciate that, BJ. Jignesh, you shared a lot with us, but I'm going to ask you to share with the viewing audience, what were the top 2 or 3 consequences for United from moving to the cloud? And feel free to share good and bad, just to give everybody a sense of what they can expect.
Ah, wow, consequences. Oh man, good. One of the top good consequence I would say is it really allowed us to be fast and agile, fail fast. Right? We all talk about how do we fail fast? What do we do to fail fast? And what this allowed to do is it allowed for us to put a lot of power in the hands of the developers, right? So developers not now waiting for virtual machines in the data center or a place to spin up their applications, along with innovation, right? So two good things because the breadth of the services that are available in the cloud, native services or whatnot, it allowed the developers to be innovative. They got to take certain services and see what works, right? So they really got their architectural and design juices flowing. Um, and one of the bad things, I wouldn't necessarily say bad, but I'd say one of the challenges that we've had is around operations, right? Because again, when I pointed out that hey, cloud is just another paradigm shift, and we're looking to adopt cloud in a cloud smart fashion, but along with that, you got the development and the operations, which has to keep up, right? It's different. It's a little different, right? Not everyone's got the same level of skills. And that's why we had to do a lot of these immersion days, skill dojos, or game days, or tabletop exercises to bring some of these other folks on board.
I just wanted to add to that. I totally agree with you, Jignesh, but I just wanted to add to that. The one other major change that's been a consequence for us is our focus has changed, right? Our infrastructure team focus has changed. It's more about enabling people, like you had mentioned, Jignesh, to get out of the way and get things done, and to do it through self-service.
Both really good points, and I think a lot of the success you both had really dealt with the upfront work that you did before your cloud journey started. So, Jignesh, I'm going to pick on you one more time. How did you link, as United and as an IT leader, how did you link the corporate strategic initiatives to the IT objectives of your cloud transformation?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things, United is in a very competitive market, and we still are today. And so, anything with corporate is how do we enable the customer experience to be better, right? And one of the big things that United talks about is our core values, which is safety, customers first, et cetera, et cetera. And so, whenever we're building a new application or IT's building a new way of supporting our customers on our front end, it all has to align, right? And so even I'll give you an example with COVID, right? How do we get better monitoring, and how do we get touchless kiosks, right? You saw those come out, right? Recently, and it was all driven through innovation, right? It was all driven through, hey, how do we align those corporate strategic goals with what our customers are looking for? Because those are our strategic goals, right? How do we best serve the customer and deliver in IT fashion? And one of the big other things that you'll see is our seats automation, right? So now whenever you're in that standby process or anything like that, we've automated that so you get notified. You don't have to go up to that desk and go get a new boarding pass, right? So you could get that right on your phone. And that was all driven through kind of the shift, not only the customer demands, but what is the environment demanding, right? So COVID, again, threw a wrench in that and said, hey, because of the environment, we want to be able to socially distance, and we want to be able to provide a safe way for new boarding passes to be issued, right? And how do we do that? Well, we do it through the app that we already have, which is a Stellar app, right?
Yeah, I really like those examples. They're very timely, and it shows the power the cloud has to allow you to respond to the changes in your business needs. As we look at cloud providers, there's a vast array of offerings that they have. BJ, I'd like to understand more. How did consumers approach the decisioning between which managed services you would consume from the cloud versus which ones you would build internally?
We still do that regularly because the services in the cloud continue to change. A lot of it is really about economics and the amount of effort required to kind of get things in place. So if we had an ability, to do things relatively inexpensively internally, and we didn't require, we had relatively static workloads, and we already had the support for the infra. We largely would keep that as we had it. But really, if it's expensive to build internally, or we needed a significant change, especially in supporter ops, that was a good opportunity to look at public cloud. So I could say, like, machine learning, for example, is a great example of a service that we're more about consuming in a public cloud than we are about building on-prem. It's cost prohibitive, and a whole support model is necessary just to bring that in-house. So we do it on a case-by-case basis, and we continue to do so.
Thank you, BJ. Jignesh, any additional thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm pretty aligned to what BJ's saying, right? So if we have the capabilities of building it in-house versus farming it out, the only other caveat I would add to that is with some of our principles around, using managed services, it helped us move that operational needle a little bit to the right? So what I mean by that is, if you look at AWS and Azure and their shared responsibility models, the more and more native you get, the less and less responsibility you have, meaning that you're not responsible for the hardware, you're not responsible for the OS, you're only responsible for what's on top of it, right? And so that, again, allowed us to focus more on developing and focus less on operations.
Jignesh, I love that, and it really makes me think about the impetus on the application. I'm curious to hear from both of you, how did you approach determining the disposition of your applications? BJ, I know you alluded to this earlier, and maybe Jignesh, you could elaborate. How did you determine what should move to the cloud versus stay on premise? If it was to move to the cloud, whether you were going to approach it from an infrastructure as a service, or platform as a service, or even software as a service, or maybe you identified applications that the business was just going to sunset. Was there a particular methodology you approached it with?
Jignesh, if you want to start this one, go ahead.
Absolutely. So it's something that, nice setup though. Thank you. It's something I alluded to earlier, right? So it was kind of like those 5 R's, right? So are we going to rehost? Are we going to replatform, re-architecture, et cetera? And again, with the impetus of us wanting to be cloud smart and not have an edict to get out of a data center or vacate a data center, we said, hey, if we're going to be cloud smart, we're going to do this right? Because one thing you'll learn about the cloud is when you get in there, that dollar bill starts right away, right? That meter starts. So the more you put it up there, the less optimized it is, the more you're paying for it, right? So what we wanted to do, again, is not only be a cloud smart from a services or that viewpoint, but also financially. We wanted to make sure that we're consistently optimized, and whatever we're putting on there, we're reiterating through it, so we're staying on top of it, cost and optimization. So yeah, we did mostly go around the re-architecture and the re-platform methodologies to get to the cloud.
Awesome.
We've had a kind of a broad mix, but our approach has been largely looking at what applications are coming up for refresh or replacement, and then looking at what are our opportunities or options there. And specifically in our strategy, we've had kind of a SaaS first focus, and then looking at PaaS, and then looking at IaaS. So we've kind of had, there's kind of a little bit of a decision tree to kind of take a look at an application and see what makes the most sense. That said, we're early in the public cloud journey, so we have a few prod applications. So we're continuing to refine that process as we go, which was one of the reasons I wanted to make sure Jignesh got a chance to answer there first. I think that we have still learning to do there, but we have certainly approached each application as an opportunity to look at the 5 R's and figure out, is this a good opportunity for us to learn about a different cloud service than we've had before, to operationalize it, to build some standards around it, to bring the right teams into the process and help grow their skills. And that's been a really helpful part of the journey for us.
Yeah, and Sorry, I'm just going to add a little bit more onto that. And David, I think you brought up a good point, right? So I did completely miss on the whole SaaS and all that. So that was part of our whole objective too, to see what we could, again, move out, right, completely. So go more to a SaaS platform, and any applications that we need to come in, PaaS was our direction as much as possible. And then the other thing I'll throw in there is that I'm not saying that we don't have any IaaS out there in the cloud. We do, but it's, again, that whole cloud smart. So any workload that we felt like that needed to run for a period of time and not consistently be on, it was a perfect candidate for the cloud, right? Some of the RDR stuff, or some environments that only get brought up for 3 months out of the whole year. Why tie up infrastructure on-prem for it? Send it to the cloud.
We call that on our side behaving cloud. And that's one of our kind of our main criteria. And so we've also looked at cloud as an opportunity for us to be able to look at our hardware refreshes in a different way. Even migrating an application from one set of existing IaaS to another set of existing IaaS. In the past, we may have had to have all of that IaaS in our data center. And now we can look at it differently, as maybe we can build or move some of that into the cloud for a short time, even if we are going to run that on our data center long term, so that we have some of that extra availability for us.
No, that's actually a really good point. I'm gonna follow up on that in just a while, BJ. But you're both in highly regulated industries, obviously energy, BJ, and transportation, Jignesh. You're also considered to be companies that are critical infrastructure for the community and for the public. So I'd like to talk a little bit about day two operations and concerns. I'll begin with you, BJ, because you actually spoke quite a bit during your review of consumers about the changes you made from an ops perspective. How did you integrate the cloud environment once you started consuming it into your current ops platforms? And I know you use a third party as well, but maybe you could elaborate a little more on that.
So we've taken a platform type of approach where our cloud operations team is largely paying attention to the cloud platform, whether it be in our private cloud or in the public cloud. And then we've taken kind of an application-centric operations approach for the applications themselves. So there is kind of a gray area in between that we've approached with an application deployment team or a DevOps team that's specifically looking at how do these applications get deployed and how do the supporting services run and make sure that those applications work. That said, just from that brief kind of synopsis, you can see that it's a team effort. It's not one team that's owning all of the things. There are too many things to be owned. So there's a lot of coordination, and we certainly, as we approach a workload and as we continue to mature, I'm sure we're going to find exceptions to this and or ways to kind of change our model to more closely adapt and work better for our operations teams. I think one of the other things that's kind of important is paying attention. We pay a lot of attention to how are we monitoring and how are we remediating and alerting and for those things, so that we're trying to get the right teams notified in the right order to pick up and help with things as we have issues or problems.
Yeah, absolutely.
I appreciate that, Jignesh. Oh, sorry. Please continue.
No, yeah, thank you. No, I was going to say, absolutely, and we built on some of that, right? So at United, one of the I won't take a lot of pride in this because it's a lot of our operations team that over the years, what they've done is they have a really solid operations maturity. And we brought them to the table and say, hey, let's make best use of their knowledge, their experience, and how do we do this, right? Because I don't want to go off and do something in a silo and on my own, which is not going to be operationally supported or standardized, right? So one of our key success criteria was that whatever you build out in the cloud, whatever you put out in the cloud, it has to go feed into the central operational model, right? Meaning that it feeds into the single pane of glass that our network engineers are looking at. So from a network perspective or a platform perspective in the cloud, that those sensors and monitors need to feed right into that. From an application perspective, application performance monitoring, we're going to use the same types of technologies. They might be a bit different in the cloud versus on-prem, but we're still going to boil all those up to the central single pane of glass, right? And at United, I think we've been pretty successful at doing that. And one of the other big things that we have is our escalation process and our incident management process. It baffled me when I got to United on, hey, when there's a critical incident, everyone's online. It doesn't matter from a VPN down. If there's a level 1 incident, we're all on the call. We're all trying to help, because restoring our operations is key for us to stay off CNET, right? That's the last thing we want to be on for a major outage due to technical issues.
No, I can definitely appreciate that. I want to move into our last segment, and I appreciate all of your answers so far and your perspectives. This last segment, we're gonna call it Mythbusters, and we're gonna have a little bit of fun. 2 short questions. If you could just state whether you agree or disagree. The first question: is cloud more expensive than operating in the data center? I guess more to not frame that as a question, make that a statement. The cloud is more expensive than the data center. Jignesh, agree or disagree?
I'll take the neutral line, but that's a tough one, David. You had to do this, right? Or DJ, David, you had to do this. I mean, is cloud more expensive than operating in the data center?
That's a tough one.
That's absolutely a tough one. I'm going to have to say disagree, because there's a lot of optimization you could do. There's a lot of, because the value is not only a dollar for dollar spend, right? It's the other things that you're freeing up your engineers' times to be able to do. So I'm going to have to say disagree.
And BJ?
I will agree with disagree with a little asterisk next to it. There are some workloads that are more expensive to run in cloud. And so you do have to look at it on a workload by workload basis. But largely we found that if we do it well, we can do it less expensively in public cloud.
No, you're both spot on. And I think where there are times that the cloud expense is is higher than in the data center, likely you're realizing higher value for that spend as well. So appreciate your perspectives there. Last statement: in the cloud, you have increased visibility for security. Do you agree or disagree?
So I would say our security team has told us that they've had better visibility in cloud. If they do it right, than they've had in our on-premises setups. It's a broad statement, and there's caveats to it. There's definitely an asterisk there, but largely that's the answer.
No, I appreciate
I'm going to borrow your
asterisks.
I'm going to continue to borrow your asterisks. Yeah, it all depends on the setup, right? The cloud has the capabilities, and the tools have the capabilities of monitoring your cloud environment the same that you do on-prem today. It's what's implemented that's going to give you success.
No, I appreciate those answers. And a lot of this is wrapped around the CCOE, the Cloud Center of Excellence, or as Ahead likes to call it, the Community of Excellence. This is really where we think beginning that cloud journey and setting the stage for all the things we talked about comes in. So I'd like to just, share Ahead's perspective, and I'm sure Jignesh and BJ, this will resonate, and you guys have covered a lot of this already, but it's important for us to just take a look at what is the Community of Excellence, Cloud Community of Excellence, and why is it important? So if we look at success in the cloud, one of the big questions I'm sure you both addressed and that our audience is thinking about is, how do you design the organization for cloud computing success? And there's several questions. We've got a few questions listed here. I really liked your kind cloud smart, because that's the second to last bullet point here, Jignesh. How do we get smarter about cloud as a business? But ultimately, it's about this last bullet point. How do you drive cloud-enabled transformation across the business? It's not just an IT project, right? It's not just for one line of business, but it really should be transformational for the entire organization. And you both spoke about this, but really that cloud community of excellence is all about the people that you put together to help define how the cloud is going to impact and evolve with the organization. Pulling from different parts of the organization, whether they be the app dev folks or DevOps, we really want to provide business and application teams the expertise to support digital transformation initiatives. We also want to take a look at how the alignment and the culture may need to change, and how to reset expectations that previously existed when you were consuming technology strictly from an on-premises perspective. And finally, the real purpose of the CCOE is to focus on ensuring security, which we just spoke about, performance, availability, cost optimization, and here's that word, Jignesh, governance, right? It's a bad word sometimes, but it is needed. So if we think about what the team responsibilities are, we like to think about it from, and I won't go through obviously and read this whole slide, but we'll think about these four, responsibility areas. There's governance responsibility, especially for companies such as Consumers and United Airlines. There's a planning aspect to it. The better you plan and the more you prepare for the unexpected, the better your experience will be along the cloud journey. Obviously, there's a build, which involves a lot of architectural and engineering decisioning. And then there's the run, day two operations, extremely important, especially for highly regulated companies, because you don't want to increase your outages. And if anything, you want to decrease them by moving to the cloud and consuming those managed services. So you both mentioned this, and I want to reiterate, the skills is really a big area, right? Because you're going to be consuming technologies either differently or potentially introducing new technologies. So it's important that you evolve from the existing model that you have and think about how do you gradually change in a small but expanding manner your consumption of technologies on the cloud. Often we see CCOEs form tiger teams around specific areas, but it's really important to establish goals and objectives early and constantly measure yourself to see how you're doing along that journey. This is also an important area for leadership and for accountability to play a factor in. So we like to think, start big or think big, and then start small. And eventually, you have to look at how does this impact your existing employees? Will they transition to new roles? Will they need to pick up new skills? How does this affect your training plan for existing team members? How does this affect your hiring? How does this affect even retention? And overall, how does this affect your architectural decisions that you make as an organization? Really important, look to retrain. Retraining comes along with the cloud journey, and I think you both mentioned that too. Obviously, it's very important to incorporate your vendors and partners. In fact, this may even be part of your vendor management strategy, is how do your vendors and partners enable you and accelerate you through your cloud journey. An important note, though, do not let your vendors and partners be your CCOE. Your CCOE should be made of stakeholders and constituents within the organization, not from an external entity. The skills transformation, just one more time reiterating that, it's really important to assess where you are from a skills perspective, formulate a plan, a battle card, if you will, on how you're going to skill up, and think about where you're going to start. Be open and honest about it. Think about, where's the value line for your organization and how do you maintain movement that continually contributes to that value. And then last but not least, I want to just cover a few do's and don'ts. These are from the experience of a head doing many, many CCOE-centric projects with many customers across a variety of industries. Again, focus on governance, not control. The CCOE is not meant to be part of that control plane, if you will, for cloud adoption. to restrict innovation and other items. I think BJ and Jignesh, you both highlighted this. It's really more about providing guidelines and guardrails and being influencers versus decision makers. Obviously, you'll have input into many of the decisions, if not all of the decisions, but it's really about that governance model. And the second do and don't, I guess, comparison here is to avoid taking a one-size-fits-all approach. Really, we see successful customers and clients take different approaches for different cloud models. Maybe there's an approach for infrastructure as a service, and that's different than the approach for software as a service. You still need to be able to be flexible to accommodate any unique needs that may arise, specifically for mission-critical applications, which I know you both have, Jignesh and BJ, as well as those application teams that are responsible for those apps. And last but not least, try to focus on differentiated governance based on your capabilities. I think between consumers and United Stories, we see different levels of start, different capabilities within the organizations. Jignesh, you entered in a company that was already approaching their public cloud journey. BJ, you were doing a transition from private cloud to public cloud. Factor in your governance, focus on those capabilities you have internally. So again, I want to thank you both, Jignesh and BJ, for joining us today. For our audience, if you'd like to learn any more, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, no, I was just going to say thank you for having us.
Yes.
It was our pleasure. And if for the viewing audience, if you'd like to learn any more about any of these topics, including the Cloud Community of Excellence, you can find more information on thinkahead.com.
All right. Thank you, David. And thank you, Jignesh and BJ. Great stuff. We really value your partnership and you taking the time out of your busy schedules to share your stories with us and our other clients. Okay, we're going to take a break now, just like we did the last 2 days. We'll take a break, let you kind of catch up on your day, and then get back together at 2 p.m. Eastern to hear from Johnny Hatch of Ahead on Mission 8, making observability as code a reality in a public cloud context. So we'll see you then.